All right, everyone, welcome back to the Abundance Formula podcast. I'm super excited today to have actually a family member on who's an incredible person, Jennifer Stanford. She's the powerhouse CEO of Emergent Performance Solutions and author of the book De-Stressed, which is for proven strategies for leaders to lower stress and boost performance. So we're going to have amazing conversation today. I'm so excited. This is obviously a super hot topic for so many people who are high performers or leaders, which is the type of people who listen to this podcast. So I'm so excited to have you on today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited. It's going to be great.
Awesome. Well, so I love starting off with our guests. Tell everybody kind of your backstory and how you've arrived at where you are today and doing the work that you're doing today.
Sure. It's funny how we often use the term like we don't eat our own dog food. So I have been, a consultant for 30 years. I've had my own business for 15 and really have helped organizations that are going through big transformation. And so, whether that's Department of Defense or Coca-Cola or, a number of people I've had the opportunity to work with in their high pressure situations and teaching them how does their personality, impact the way that they perceive information and move through change. And through all of that, I think I lost sight of myself and I just was doing. And so, for those of you that don't know me yet or know my backstory, I'm an Army spouse. My husband had been in the Army for almost 30 years. So, made it through things that most people would find stressful, like multiple deployments and, maybe not always knowing where your spouse is, some of those types of things, raising children on your own because of that, a lot of things that you just had to do. And so I think I became this person that was finding their value in being the superhero in everything. And so I was going to be, super mom, super wife, right? Super Army spouse, super deaconess at church, super youth group leader, all the things I was going to be the best at. And, I think for a long time, I was able to hold that up because I was a high performer, right? So I could do that. But in everything, that only goes so long. And so what happened for me is that I just got to a point where, my mother had been in and out of the hospital. She had had a stroke, just a number of things were happening to her. My son was having health challenges. My business was being sued. I had won, a super large contract, learning how to maneuver that, and then at that same time, I found that someone who I prided myself in what I thought was healthy, I was a big runner. I was doing all these things. And all of a sudden I got really bad pneumonia and my body just crashed, like to the point of I had to be, hospitalized, and I basically was out of commission for almost a month, which if you're an entrepreneur and you're, running a household and doing all these things, a month is entirely too long. A weekend is too long, right? And so it really caused me to pause. And, a couple things that I would say is I had to really check about where I was getting my value. I consider myself a very faithful person, but for some reason I still was feeling like for all the humans on the earth, I still needed to do the work. And so, I missed an opportunity to connect there. But I think in doing all that, I put a lot of investment in understanding what stress was doing, why it was happening to me, and realizing that I wasn't the only person. I got so much feedback during that time when I came out the other end better. Well, how did you do that? Right? Like I'm struggling with that. And so just as a service to my friends and some of the people that I interact with every day, I was like, I know I'm not the only woman going through this. And so that was really the impetus of the book and, how it came about. I wasn't going to write about stress. I was writing about change management, and stress was one of the chapters. And when I got to that chapter, I was like, this is the thread, right? This is really what was causing so much damage in my own life. Because at the end of the day, what I found was I was not doing everything as a super person. I felt like I was because of the level of effort, but I think the output and the outcomes were not what I had intended. And it was hurting in several areas. I'll leave the rest for the book, but there you go.
Right. Yes. Well, and I was curious. So as you started learning that in your own world, number one, is there a difference between stress and pressure, or are those kind of the
Yes.
same thing? Okay, tell us about that.
No, I love that. So that's a great question. So I think pressure is great, right? Pressure is a great motivator. It drives us, right? It can be an energy boost. What happens though is that, so they call that eustress, EUSTRESS. And that is where pressure is a motivator. It challenges us, it pushes us. The problem lies when we stay in that place for too long. So pressure cannot be upheld without rest and recovery. And so what happens for a lot of, if we said type A or, high performers, we don't pause for that rest. And that was really what I was learning was I would say things like, oh, I'm self-care, right? I'm doing this and that to self-care, but it wasn't true rest. And so what happens is we cross this threshold from pressure into distress, right? Distress. And that is where our body then starts to unravel, right? Our body and our mind, right? And our spirit. And that is when we get into a state where our body now doesn't know how to recover. We're in this place where we come to where we're fighting, right? Our body starts to fight against us and fighting for safety that it can no longer find. And so that's when we start to have those negative reactions. And that's where people in industry, you hear a lot, they're moving to burnout. And that's really when you've been in that place of poor stress, bad stress without recovery for too long, that your body then starts to fight back looking for that safety.
Mm-hmm. Did you find in working with like these, the level of high performers that you're dealing with, are they receptive to that concept that they are not immortal and that they, or do they feel like they got this, do they see the light in that or after some deep talk with them, can they acknowledge to themselves like, you know what, I'm actually not high performing in this other area of my life, maybe in business, but not in my personal health or in my relationships? Do they admit to that or does it take some work to get to that place with people?
I think you have to create a safe space to give people permission to have that acknowledgement. I just, finished an amazing effort with one of the largest hospitals in our area. And I had the executives across all the departments. And I think they were looking for that permission to say, you know what, I don't have it right in all the areas. And so we had just such an amazing discussion about, you're right, maybe I'm doing great here, but there's a ripple effect. So as an example, like if I'm not resting, right? If I just use that as an example, and I think that I'm high performing, but I'm short with my husband or my kids, am I really high performing, right? So it always comes with a cost. And I think, I've used the term, your body starts taking receipts, right? Well, so does your marriage, so does your workplace. And what I find with high performers in the workplace that I've worked with is when they operate at that level, what happens is people start to think that that is what is expected. And then they start to follow suit. And now we end up with an entire team of people that are not making space for that recovery. And therefore, everybody starts to go down at the same time. And so part of it is the responsibility we have for the examples we lead in our life. But the other part is then are we really creating a safe place for people to truly rest, recover, and then get back to operating at a high level? Because operating at a high level isn't the bad part. It's
right.
just if we do it for too long without recovery.
Right. Right. So what qualifies as like actual rest? Like if you were like, well, I thought I was resting. I slept in a little bit longer today, one day, but like for, long-term function to not burn out would qualify as something doable. I love how in your book, and you don't have to share all of it, but like the snippets of different buckets and like different things that are of consideration for what that even means. I thought that was helpful for people.
I think that, it's going to be slightly different, like you said, based on those energy buckets. But hands down to me, some of the things that people need to consider is, one, am I creating space in my day? So I often say to people, do an audit of your calendar. And I work with so many executives that the majority, probably 90% of their day is spent in meetings. And so they do these back to backs. We've become so tied to the Outlook calendar because it has a 30-minute default. Somehow we think that 30 minutes or 1 hour is the only acceptable amount of time for a meeting. So we schedule these back to backs. You'd be amazed at the number of leaders I talk to that don't even take bathroom breaks. Therefore, they stop drinking water, which we absolutely need. They'll stop drinking water because they don't want to have to get up to go to the bathroom because they feel like they don't have time. You're laughing and it does sound silly, doesn't it? But water is what we need to maintain clarity, to have a higher cognitive state. I mean, you're extremely familiar with the physical world. You understand how all of that works, but without that. And so I also ask people to audit your sleep. And what I find a lot of the time is people are going to bed, with their phone by the bed, checking it up to the end, whether it's the TikTok, the Instagram, or just, checking that last email. And then they get up and that's the first thing that they do as well. And what happens when we do that is we're just not getting good REM sleep. And when we don't give our brain a chance to recover, and it's not even just our brain, it's our gut,
Mm.
right? It's our soul. And so if we don't have those two things, if I tell people make enough space to go to the bathroom and drink water, right?
Yeah.
And give yourself enough time that you can rest. Now, they're going to say 7 to 8 hours is optimal, but I know when I was operating at that high level, I thought I was so great because I was sleeping for 4 hours. I'd get up at 4 because I was going to go to the gym, right? Because I was physically fit. So I'll go to the gym and then I'll work until 2 in the morning because I have to fit it all in because I want time from 6 to 8 to put the kids to bed. And so I really, just because you can do something doesn't mean you really should do something. And over time, that starts to catch up. And I think what we don't realize, and that is why I've been spending so much time doing the research, talking with doctors, making sure I understand what's happening to the body, is that we don't feel it right away, right? Our bodies have this amazing resilience. And so when we don't feel it, we think that means everything's okay. So we keep going. And for a lot of people, it takes something major, heaven forbid, like a heart attack or myself getting pneumonia or, having something worse happen before we really wake up and say, wow, maybe things aren't going as well for me as I thought.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. How can someone tell the difference between healthy ambition and unhealthy striving, like on a
Mm, that's a,
person? Yeah.
that's a great question. I think that you honestly you have to check with yourself. So you have to say, one, are my goals realistic? And in that, am I consciously, right, filling up those energy buckets, right, on a weekly basis at least? So do I know some of those basics, that I'm drinking half my body weight in ounces of water a day, right? Am I getting enough sleep, right? Am I putting good things into my gut? Those are the easy physical things that we can look at, right? But emotionally, you have to ask yourself, have I felt short-tempered this week? Did I snap at someone I care about? Did I catch myself rolling my eyes or almost saying something in a meeting that I wish I haven't? Have I made errors in things, right? Have I looked at business processes and maybe missed something because maybe cognitively things aren't working as well as I hoped, right? And so I do think that we can put those checks and balances in place to say, is this healthy ambition? And I think in everything we have to say, what's my why, which is a very powerful question, but and at what cost? Because when we ask that second part of the question, is your marriage worth it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is your children growing up without a parent worth it? Is your health worth it? Because here's what happens. I'm in my 50s now, but I started this behavior in my 20s and 30s, and it was my late 30s, early 40s when my health really started to crumble. Well, for every decade past 30, we start deteriorating naturally. And so we're giving our bodies just less time to recover. It doesn't mean we can't be in great health, but it just takes a little bit longer. So if we go ahead and think I'll get there later in life, we're missing the
Hmm.
idea that we're not going to have that time back, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Right. No, definitely. Um, One thing that I love that you talked about is like people having misconceptions of like how they see stress, but you talk about stress as information. Like it doesn't have to be the negative way we think of stress or even pressure. Same thing. Like it's all about the lens you're looking at it. What lens should people really approach stress with
Yeah, and I
or
think you
pressure?
need, yeah, and both are data. And I think
Hmm.
we have put so much saying stress is a feeling, right? I'll feel it, it's how I feel. But when we put these measures in place, it becomes data points, and we have to fit that data in just like we would anything else that we're working with in our life, right? Our finances or our goals, all of that has to be looked at through that lens. But for a lot of people, we might see stress differently. You and I have different personalities. We have different perspectives from which we see the world. So stress might impact us differently. My husband is an extremely logical person, right? I'm a very relationship way person. So if I am all of a sudden all up in my feelings or I want to discuss feelings, that just by its very nature is going to be stressful to him, right? Where if he wants to talk to me about a lot of data and these big problems and where all this is coming from, when all I want is just a short answer, that could stress me out. So just by the way that we perceive information, we're going to either be stressed out by certain things or stressed by
Hmm.
certain behaviors. And so when you're working with a group of people, right, you're going to have different perspectives. And so as a group, we may not be handling stress the same way, but as a person, I need to know what are the things that will be stress triggers for me. And then also, how can I use that as information to then counteract those stressors? And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's important for people to know because we don't all stress the same way and we don't all de-stress the same way.
Mm-hmm.
What works for me may not work for you, Gina. We can't all do this, the exact same things. And so when we realize that and we tap into it, it really comes down to emotional intelligence. When we understand ourselves and then we understand the group of people around us, we really can start to build those skill sets that are going to allow us to use that data, right, as a
Mm-hmm.
way to make progress and move forward and ultimately reach our goals, which is what we're all wanting to do.
Right. How do you teach leaders in because there's so many different modalities to figure out what perspectives of your team as a leader having a team, how to learn who you've got in this collective group that you're trying to lead? Do you have certain ones that you like? I know you've talked about Myers-Briggs before, but then there's other things, and you kind of put things together in your own way. What have you found works really well to kind of figure out how to lead the group you've got?
I think the important thing is that organizations are using something, right?
Hmm.
I'm not necessarily tool agnostic because I used a tool for years and then I ended up, taking it and turning it into something else that, focuses on stress and personalities. But whether a group is using strength finders or DISC
Hmm.
or MBTI, like you mentioned, you can take that data and utilize it for something other than just saying, I want to learn about myself and I want other people to understand me. It's, do I understand what this means for stress? So if you're working with a tool set like that, as long as it has those elements, and most of the time you can Google that and find that out, then you know what you're working with on your teams. But the other thing is, ask people. I find
Right.
that in a room, I don't necessarily have time to say, you know what, we're going to all sit down and we're going to take a 20-minute assessment before we
Hmm.
can go any further. But I certainly can come into every meeting, and I do this actually for all my meetings. And I ask people, I want to know how you're feeling in each of your energy buckets. I want a smiley face or a sad face for physical, for intellectual, right? For emotional and purposeful, because that just allows me before I start a meeting as an executive over a group to know, right, let me just get the read of the room here. Because
Yeah.
if I'm going to then come back and say, we're doing a major change effort, and if I have three people that are physically low in their energy and intellectually low in their energy, that's probably not the smartest time for me as a leader to introduce something like that. And so I think it gives us a lot of leverage and a lot of great information to really tap into where our teams are. We're showing we care, one, but we're also honoring where they're at and trying to make sure that we're doing work that correlates with that. And if we see patterns and trends, then we have the ability to address them with data instead of just what does our gut feeling tell us.
No, I think that's so valuable, that self-awareness to be like, okay, not everyone's like me. And again, to just recognize there's different lenses people are taking in information to make interpretations out of. So it helps you even to be less triggered as a leader of why would they do that in response? But then it's like, oh, well, this is how they receive that information. It stressed them in this way, or they need to go for a walk on their lunch break instead of sitting here and continue working on things while they eat. That might work or something, like just understanding there's different vantage points than your own.
Hmm.
Seems so simple, but it's easy to skip over when you're just, rushing towards the goals. But longevity, I think and it makes just more fulfillment at work too, to really feel like you can appreciate. I know you've said before, like appreciate the different
Hmm.
perspectives, even if they're not your own. I think that's really important. And kind of speaking about the different perspectives, how much stress comes from our circumstances versus the meaning that we assign to those circumstances?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think there are definitely circumstances, especially if I think about like toxic work environments, which I get brought into those from, time to time if something's just not going well and you almost move from a consulting role to a mediator role, right? But I've been into those situations where I could not say, you know what, it's just the way that you're interpreting it because I can see the toxicity in there, right? And so it's caused this intervention. So something that extreme, I think there is an environmental problem. Or, there's a lot of people that I talk to that maybe are really struggling with relationship issues at home. And, that is going to come into the workplace, whether you like it or not. It's very hard for us to, compartmentalize in that way. And so it's going to have an impact. So there 100% are environmental and different situations that we're in that are going to cause stressors, right? But there also are going to be things that because of my personality, I might be perceiving as
Hmm.
stress, right? You gave a great example of, oh my gosh, I can't believe, you're stressed out by that. Or, those types of things, we do have an opportunity to pivot and look at things differently. And so I don't like to just negate that those environments don't exist, because they can. Um, but we also have the opportunity to call the environment out and say, I want to improve this environment, and this is causing stress, and what can we do to improve it? So I do think we have some opportunities to work to see that environment differently and say, is this the way that I'm perceiving it, or is this actually what is happening? And, that takes some self honesty,
Hmm.
right? And that takes a willingness to look at self first and understand, am I part of the stressor in this situation? And do I have an opportunity to change? And that's probably why I love change management with stress, because I do believe that we have the opportunity to start with ourselves, start, questioning our role in anything that is going on, and make decisions. I always say, our attitude and our effort are the only two things we can control, but showing up differently and just taking it one day at a time and seeing if we can make those improvements. And I've been amazed at, again, giving people smaller goals like that to say, hey, can you show up tomorrow and just acknowledge that your attitude and your effort equal your energy? And I want you just to think about showing up differently tomorrow or for that next meeting. And I've been amazed at just asking for those bite-sized chunks, even at the executive level, goes a long way to get out of your head and start getting to a place, where you can focus for that clarity that we're all seeking.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. Um, so how do people catch themselves when they're getting like what are some of the first warning signs that they're getting close to that burnout phase and it's time to shift?
Yeah, so I think, physically in our body, we actually can feel it. You can feel it. I'm just touching the back of my neck if you're only listening on this podcast, but feeling at the base of your neck, feeling your shoulders, and just feeling, is it tight? A lot of people feel their heart, right? They feel that stress, beating during the day. They might just feel that tension. That's one of the first things. I think if you wake up and you still feel tired, or you wake up and you feel anxiety, that is stress that you have carried through the night that is showing up still in the morning. So those are some very simple things that we can look at. If you suffer, if your stomach is upset a lot, whether it's been diagnosed IBS or just something that you think, those are things your body is telling you. If you happen to be a person that checks their blood pressure, notice, it's consistently high. A lot of times that is your body trying to tell you that something is going on. And so there are a number of things that we can just notice. A lot of times for women, it does happen for men, but our hair might start to fall out under big stress, right? Our nails might be breaking more. A lot of things that we might be breaking out. Right. Even
Hmm.
at my age, you can still break out if you're having a very stressful moment. And so I think just being aware of what's going on around you and not trying to shift the blame to something else, right?
Hmm.
And just really, again, and I say this over and over, but create space so that you are in touch with yourself,
Hmm.
right? Create space. A lot of times, faithful, we probably create space. We've talked about this before, but to pray, but are we creating that space just to listen? Right? To listen to what God's saying, to listen to what our body's saying, and just be in touch with that environment so that we're paying more attention. Because it's when we stop paying attention that these things keep creeping up until it might be too late.
Right. And I love how in your book you talk a lot about how, again, your energy is a currency, and as a leader, your team's going to catch the energy that you basically bring to the room, like that you're the starting point, and that can be a big place of encouragement for the leaders to be like, okay, it does start with me. This whole like stuff that might seem fluffy, but it's also real. Like people who do value performance, like okay, the mental fog is real, the physical exhaustion, or the headaches, or the all these things are real, and that if they
Absolutely.
want their team to perform better, they can also look at themselves to be like, okay, how am I maybe part of this? Is that sometimes hard for people to take in, or do they see it pretty quick when you bring it
I
up?
was just going to say, believe it or not, that is one of the things I have found that executives, when we've had this conversation, have caught on to the quickest. When they realize, because I think they could realize the impact they have on an organization. And so when we start saying, your energy is your currency, and if you walk into a room, right, and you're not making eye contact, or you walk into the building, you're not saying good morning, or however the case may be, people then start to fill in that space with what's going on. did I do something wrong? Are they mad at me? Did they not like that report? Or, and then when you start doing that, now we're not performing at a level that we should be. And so I have found for good and bad. So for good energy, I can bring the good energy and that's going to get everybody going. But also if I'm not bringing my best energy, and the statistic that I give them is that about 50% of daily performance can be attributed to the energy that the leader shows up with. So if you don't show up at 100%, we can't expect people to be working at a high enough level, right? We're going to actually be draining them. And so we just miss an opportunity to be our best. And I'll also say, I do think that responsibility lies with the leader. I say this over and over. If you think leadership isn't about you, you're in the wrong position because it truly is. However, that doesn't mean that you have to fake it till you make it. I hear people say that. It doesn't mean that you have to show up with 100% energy every day. It means bring your best. Let your team know that you are bringing your best. You're trying your best. And what happens is they start to absorb what your best is, and that still boosts them up. And now they're bringing energy to the situation as well. And so what I find for team dynamics is when we have everybody trying to bring their best, everybody appreciate that. And all in all, it builds up energy more, even if you're not feeling your best that day. And I think that's just such an amazing phenomenon that happens with energy and with groups is that, and that's the same thing if someone has really poor energy and a really bad attitude, it can suck the energy out of the room because negativity, unfortunately, can be more powerful than positivity. And that's a horrible way that our brains work, but it can be often what we remember or, what sits with us are those negative memories and feelings over the positive ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So one thing that I know, I've heard a lot of the leaders that I know, and it's just kind of a hot topic is, so how as a leader can you balance corporate expectations? So like you're a leader, but then there's leaders, above you up a chain. So how do you balance corporate expectations and demands with like actual real life demands that are happening in real time? Like there's a bunch of reports or data they want and they want it at this certain time, but then you also have real patients out there that need taken care of or real situations that need handled literally. And you're trying to do all the things, but you have to make choices. How do you manage kind of the stressors that deal with the powers above, but then the real things with boots on the ground?
Yeah, I think that's always a tough balance. And I think we have to get great at prioritization. And so I think that a lot of when I break it down for people, so if you're not familiar, there's a very simple tool called the Eisenhower matrix, right? And it just allows you to put things in buckets based on, how urgent is it, right? Versus how important is it. And so if we have clarity of expectations, which is always where things start, from above us, right? If we have that clarity, then we know what is the most urgent and we should start asking the questions. A lot of times I will tell leaders, if you put this quadrant matrix up on a board, right? And you make sure that you ask the question, help me understand where this falls in the quadrant. Often things that executive leaders said was urgent and important is really just important, but not urgent, right? Or it falls somewhere else just by bringing that visibility. So I think we have to have what I consider to be the managerial courage to manage up and to ask those clarifying questions, right? But then we also have to remember that not everything that comes out of our mouth as a priority is probably urgent and important. And we have to do the same matrix so that there's people on our team that might be better suited to do something. That's the power of the team, right? And understanding what has to get done. I think when organizations, and you started to mention healthcare, and I think that's one of the bigger ones where you actually have patient care that does become urgent and important at all times. I think you have to look at that, really from a structural perspective and decide what tasks fall into where so that people can start to make those choices. Because if everything is urgent and important, then not everything could be urgent and important. It's just the way that it works, right? And I don't like to say nothing is urgent and important, but not everything can be. And so we have to be willing to be clear on expectations and understanding. And I think if we're not getting that as people that are lower, maybe down in the matrix, we have to be willing to ask the question and get that clarity because now we're operating at a smarter level and it comes down to working smarter.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such a helpful idea, tool that people in leadership positions can use? Because I know that's one thing that I just know that can be a struggle is there's so many irons in the fire. And yes, there's so many important things that would need to be done for the business to grow, but realistically in a day, you might not always be able to get them all done. So then especially if you're a new leader in that position as a manager or whatever it might be, how do you know which one so that you can feel confident in the decision you had to make so that you're less stressed because you're like this, of the options, this is what executive division need to be made.
Mhm.
Or I loved how you even said manage up, like to be brave enough to get the clarity. So then you're also not stressed worrying about what the people above you think. Oh, well, she doesn't think this is important. He's not doing this. Like it was important to me. Like you communicate properly up so they also know where your mind's at. Like you're trying to do the best for everyone and organize it. And that's a smart thing. So I think was two really great takeaways from
Yeah,
that
well,
for
and
sure.
you'll find too that when you poll leaders of late on some of the stressors, a lot of the big one is around decision fatigue. I feel like I'm
Mm,
having to make so many decisions, and what ends up happening is because you're not necessarily either allowed yourself, right, to
mm-hmm.
start making some of the decisions or allowing others to make those decisions and there's not clarity, we spend so much time in the decision making process and our confidence goes down that we're not necessarily executing on those decisions. And organizations need people to make decisions with clarity.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be tough. As an example, my personality perspective is very action oriented. And so I think a lot of things are very important. So I have to use this matrix. I'm pointing over here because it's
Yeah.
on my wall. Every week I set it for the week because I have a tendency to think things are urgent. I want to be so responsive. I want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that I'm not hurting anybody's feelings or doing anything that's going to make anybody feel bad. And so I put an urgency on something that might not really be there. And
Mm-hmm.
so by, again, that word space I'm going to use again, but giving myself space to look at everything I have going on, putting it on the matrix, I find that, wow, there's really some things that somebody else can do or that I don't even need to do at all. I can delete it off the list altogether. And so without giving ourselves space to create that clarity, we just kind of run in this weird cycle that we just have a hard time getting out of.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's going to be a game changer for people for sure. Another question I know I've heard of a lot is like, as leaders, like how do people, again, we grow up and we go through school where there's like check boxes and you can get through all the check boxes and then you win and then you're like, yes, next challenge. But when you're in a leadership role in a business that's growing, like the checklists will never all get checked in real, or like, they may not be able to. So how do you manage the constant to-do list that seems to never end, or you feel like you've got homework but you don't want to just bring it home all the time and work through the night? Like how do you know how to balance the stress or pressure that comes with there always being something undone or left to be done, and at some point you have to turn it off and go home or rest? Like how do they
Mhm.
manage that process?
I think one of the best things that I learned from a mentor is creating routines. And so when we live by the checklist, like you said, the checklist never ends. But when we create routines, so Michael Hyatt was a mentor of mine in Franklin, Tennessee, not too far from you.
Mhm.
And he really taught us, as we had like a CEO cohort that worked together there, but he told us and made us implement the power of routines. And so, as an example, I have a daily startup routine, then a workday startup routine, right? Then I do work. Then I have a work day shutdown routine and then an evening shutdown routine. And so I only have those spaces for those activities. And so, as an example, you can have a checklist, but if you're using that Eisenhower matrix, you're going to be able to also see and assign dates to what really has to happen when. Is this a pressure I'm putting on, or is something driving that? And I think that we have to, again, different perspectives are going to feel different ways. A very organized perspective will finish their checklist probably each day because they manage to the plan and the schedule so well. And so they may find that at the end of the day, they can close the desk down, go home, and not think about work again till the next day. That's just one personality type, right? So it doesn't work for everybody. But I think when we have a routine and we honor those routines, what we're doing is we're also creating these boundaries. So those stressors don't continue through, right? And then start, because what happens is with the best of intentions, right? With the best of intentions, we say, I'm going to stop at 6 p.m. And then I'm going to, spend time with my family. I'm going to do whatever. I will say this very honestly, as someone who does this all the time, I will be sitting downstairs and perhaps it's family time. My phone is right there. And I might all of a sudden, oh, did I get a LinkedIn comment? I better respond. I'm supposed to be better on social media, right? And now I've just, taken time away. So when you set the routines, you then have to honor them. It's not just easy to set it, but in doing so, we're honoring the things that we have already said are important to us. And I think you have to be that advocate for yourself. And that's how you also protect and create those boundaries that maybe have felt hard to do before.
Mm-hmm. And I love how you've mentioned earlier on just kind of starting in those small doses, because then you can experience the micro wins, like, oh, I actually really did, not look at the phone and enjoyed the movie with the family. And guess what? I slept better. And the next day I felt more fulfilled and I felt better and I performed better. Like you can kind of get those small wins to see, hey, that really did make an actual valuable difference to my productivity. And then you can gradually grow more of the self-care routine part of it where you are able to shut it down because you see that although you might feel really behind, the rejuvenation will bleed in a positive way into the next day as opposed to bleed negatively into the next day
Absolutely.
in all those other
Absolutely.
buckets. Um, so I love that. Another thing I love that you talked about in your book, and you can kind of just tease here for us, is that um, this concept around how stress can be related to unmet expectations more than the actual adversity. Do you want to give everyone
Mm-hmm.
sort of an idea of what that might look like?
Sure. I think, and I
Mhm.
came up with this really thinking about myself, right, in the
Yeah.
relationships that I have in my life. And I'm not shy at all to ever talk about, I've been married for 31 years now, so
Yeah.
I'm never shy talking about that. But, there were times where, and I think the reason I relate it to even personal in the book, although it applies to work, is because I think it's one of the places that we might do it the most. But I say that, expectations that we don't share, that we're not clear and vocalize or document, become contracts that people never signed. And so I talk about that. And what happens is we have these expectations that we set without clarifying and making sure that the other person that is involved, right, has accepted that. And then we get ourselves stressed out when those expectations aren't met. And so I think and this is so true of the workplace. I find this that people will say, well, I said it in a meeting. And I say, okay, but did you document it? Do you have an SOP for that? Did you put it in their performance plan? Is it even in their job description?
Yeah.
Just because you said it in a meeting doesn't mean, unless you said, I'm saying this in the meeting, I want everyone to write it down. It's going to make it into,
Hmm.
into performance reviews and job roles shortly.
Hmm.
We haven't done a good job at setting the expectation. And what happens is we spend time and energy in our mind and in our body circling those unmet expectations. We become frustrated with a coworker that we assumed knew that we wanted the report by the end of the day, and then it doesn't come. And now we start to question if they're even a valuable member of the team, or do they not like me? We start to do these spin cycles because we either let our ego get in the way, we let fear get in the way, or we just didn't make the time to clarify and therefore didn't get a solid expectation. And so I always say it is on you to confirm the expectation, not to just assume that it's going to come from the other side, right? You
Hmm.
have to be willing to set that yourself so that you have clarity. Because when you have clarity, you have peace of mind. And when we have peace of mind, we're stressless,
Hmm.
period.
Right. No, that's so true. Um, and then kind of lastly, before we get into the final couple questions, another thing that I've heard a lot of is like, how do you recommend people, whether they're on a team or they are a leader and have leaders above them, how do people learn to manage their stress with fear-based leaders? People who
Mm.
kind of there's numbers and their approach to leadership isn't maybe what it should be, but you're also a leader that's dealing with it and you're trying to lead in the way you want to, but there's numbers you have to hit and you're getting the speech of if you guys don't hit it, then we'll find people who will, or it's definitely a real thing that people experience and they're trying to, and it doesn't mean that those people are actually going to delete say you from your position, but the words are being said and there's still the you're praised one day and then punched in the throat the next or whatever, like what does that dynamic look like in a way that would be more optimal as far as stress?
I think that's tough. And what I've tried to give in terms of encouragement is Jen's opinion from working with a lot of organizations is that when leaders behave that way, there is something going on with them that is causing that stress to come out as a reaction. And so I like to try to start with, okay, can I have a little bit of empathy, even if this is being directed mainly towards me, just to try to understand what's going on. And I often, again, I talk about, being a courageous leader yourself, and sometimes we have to do that up, but just saying, I hear you saying, right, that this is a stressful financial number that we need to hit. Could you please help me understand a little bit more what's behind it? I really want to make sure that I give the team great guidance and not just tell them to get it done. Would you help me understand that a little bit better? I have found that if we can use phrases like help me understand, tell me a little bit more about how I can ensure the team reaches this goal, it causes even the angriest or the most stressed out of leaders to pause a second and think, okay, well, maybe I wasn't clear enough. Let me say it again. Now, unfortunately, if they come back with, I just said it, do I need to say it again, or should I find somebody else that'll listen? I think we then have to start to question, am I in the right environment? We talked about environments a little bit
Mm-hmm.
earlier. I know that people have different financial burdens that cause them to have jobs that they have, but I also believe that there are enough jobs out there that nobody has to work in a toxic work environment. And so we
Mm-hmm.
have choices. And so I think the more that we can show empathy that maybe somebody else is going through something and just seek to understand for clarity, because at the end of the day, your energy is your currency. We talked about that. If you are leading a team and they are thriving and you have an executive above you that is really putting negative pressure on you, that can only last so long because your team is performing. And
Mm-hmm.
so as a leader, sometimes unfortunately we're that buffer between where that negativity is coming from. But I've also found with executives, when you have the opportunity to ask them yourself, or perhaps someone that is a partner to them that is a trusted advisor to you, that you could say, hey, I'm really struggling, right, with Jen right now. She has been coming down, on our team for the last month and we're performing. I just don't know how to address it. Could you help me understand a method I might be able to use? There's always someone in the chain of command that we can talk to that can help us with that. And I think that when we start to learn how to frame questions and to seek to understand with empathy, a lot of times we can get that clarity and still show up with the proper amount of energy to lead our teams towards success. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean you should be the one that gets throat punched every
Yeah.
other day, right? But at some point, I think it's also okay to say, you know what, I feel throat punched. Help me
Yeah.
understand what's going on. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's going to get a laugh, right? It
Yeah.
really depends on, the trust that you have established with the people around you. And I think if I could, leave thoughts in people's minds today, it's going to be, we need to create those trusting environments as much as we want to be a part of them. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we continually do that, hopefully we are building environments where people are thriving and it feels like we have trust and we're building psychological safety. And if we don't, I think we have to be willing as a leader. It might mean that we're going to get throat punched, but we still need to protect the team that works with us and relies on us for that safety. Otherwise, all we're doing is just like opening doors to chaos, and we
Mm-hmm.
can't then expect anything from anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I just know like in the experiences that I have or been a part of or know about, it's like in reality, so many executives actually appreciate professional honesty. It's like it's so really my husband's really good at this. Like he's not someone that can like he has no filter, but he can talk professionally. But so many people find his personality refreshing then, and even I do like in marriage because there's not a lot of like there's no passive like if he's
Sure.
unhappy, he's going to tell you. And it's
Yep.
refreshing that you're like, well, I'm glad we didn't have to go 2 weeks, you know, having negativity between us and not really address like he's not going to let it sit. And so a lot of people appreciate saving them time on,
Yes.
okay, you need more clarity on this. Oh, okay, you need a better way to phrase it to your team so they can be bought into the goal as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to just, I need these numbers. That doesn't fire anybody up. So, I mean, people can buy into it if you can constructively provide the feedback or ask for that clarity. And I think that's huge. And people really find that valuable to just be really honest in a good way. You can do a lot with that,
I
as a
would
leader.
agree.
So,
I think that's an outstanding way to put it. And I think if you, again, the reason that I use the word empathy, like, can you appreciate where somebody might be coming from? Because perhaps that executive hasn't had water, hasn't been to the bathroom,
yeah,
hasn't, and is just in passing saying, I need those numbers because it's the only time they think they're going to see you that day. And maybe it's not as tragic as we just made it in our mind. And
right.
so I think sometimes when we can just create that pause, right? And then maybe, followed up if you have a chance to see them, or, in an email that is, professional, but
Right.
saying, hey, I just want to make sure that I got that, right? I want to make sure I'm making you successful. We always have an opportunity, to circle back, even if we didn't handle things the way we wish we had, right off the bat. But I have found with so many executives, they're not even aware because one, no one has said anything to them. And two, they just haven't created any space in their own day, right?
Hmm. Right. Well, so what are you currently working on that you're excited about and have coming up that people need to keep an eye out for?
So well, it's funny because my husband is really encouraging this. It has been it's on my plate, is that I'm really interested in creating a children's book around de-stress.
Oh,
I have
cool.
found a lot of families, believe it or not, the executives have said, I've been reading your book to my kids. And I'm like, ew, like, what do you mean? But like letting them color in the pages? No, no, no. We're asking, some of the family questions to find out if we're really stressed. And I said, well, that's great. But what I'm really saying, and I'm also working, I'm on the board of a university. And what I'm finding is that so many from young all the way to getting ready to enter the workplace have had stressors in their time, but have not had the opportunity to understand really how to deal with stress. And so they get into the workplace and all of a sudden it can feel extremely overwhelming, and that just carries over. And we're seeing such extreme numbers of stress, and really with every industry, but also with this younger generation coming into the workforce. So it's really caused me pause to say, how can we address this earlier? How can we get to children, and then
Mhm.
especially in the college age, and make it a part of the experience so that we learn it earlier? And there's a lot of schools that are doing some great things. Kids are learning grounding now, and
Mhm.
box breathing and things like
Mhm.
that are so helpful. But learning how to be brave and forthcoming with your thoughts and ideas, but also knowing how to not be a victim to those either, right? And I think
Mhm.
that's important for young people to understand. So that's just on a personal and professional thing.
Yeah.
I have a lot of speaking engagements that I enjoy doing for organizations that are super fun, and then my government clients that don't move quite as quickly, but they are
Mhm.
always powerful and fun. And so those become things that I love doing. I've been very blessed. I honestly love working. And so
Yeah.
I'm the person that has to make sure I create those boundaries. Otherwise, I'd probably do it a little too much.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love it. Well, where can everyone find you, follow you, and make sure that and where is your book available? I'll make sure I have it in the show notes, of course, as well. But where can they find you, follow you, and all the
Yeah,
things?
probably the easiest place is just to go to jenstanford.com with one end. So jenstanford.com. There's a link to the book. The book is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. There's Audibles, all the things that are out. And I think that that's probably the easiest place. All of my social media handles are at the Jen Stanford.
Great. And I'll have all of those as well, easy in the show notes as well, that you can just click and go straight to. So, now to my final question that I ask everybody on the podcast that I absolutely love hearing the different answers to is, what does living an abundant life mean to you? And if someone were to ask you how they could start to build an abundant life for themselves, what would you tell them?
Oh, I love that. To me, living an abundant life is feeling like I am really filled in my purposeful bucket. So when I talked about the energy buckets, so for me, that is serving youth in my church environment. And so making sure that I always have the time and energy to do that. And so I think if you want to lead an abundant life, you should be able to look at all areas of your life, I think, with a smile. I feel like when I really got to that stage, I could look at my family and I felt great. I looked at my health and I felt great. I looked at where I was spending my time and I felt great. To me, that is what abundance means. And so I think if you're looking for that, it's really trying to say, what fills my bucket? What is my personal why? And why do I want to wake up every day with a smile? And what am I willing to do to get there? And I have found that when and I even say this in the book, but if we're going through a particularly stressful period, if we can serve somebody else, I find that it often refills our bucket, and having our buckets filled is an abundance in itself. So that would be my favorite thing to share.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much. Pausing the recording now.